quite simply a reactionary stance to the way things have been changing.
I was going to bed. I really was. I promise. But then, Dave, that video was amazing. So please go back and watch the whole thing. Watch his entire channel because he is saying all the things. Um, I just had this conversation this weekend with a guy. My entire life happens online. And so this guy had been trying to date me, and it didn't work out for a lot of reasons, but in part because he went into this moment of like, we were having like a normal, like I thought, like a regular conversation, and he got really defensive and started saying that I was saying things that I wasn't saying. And by the time that starts happening for me, I'm just out. But he's a really sweet person. And I often do find it a lot easier in some ways when it comes to wrong-headed thinking to reach people who are more conservative than I do people who are, on the more lefty side of things. Uh, there's an there's there's a sense that there's an assumption on both sides already that we both think the other person is completely wrong, and we're going to have to like compromise or um try to come to understanding of each other. And so conversation is often for me a little bit easier that way. So I was having this conversation with him, and he was talking about how censored he felt because people wanted him to use pronouns, and they call him a bigot if he didn't use their preferred pronouns. And he lives, and he said, and I said, well, I I said, has any trans person ever called you a bigot for not using their pronoun? He's like, yeah, they yelled it at me. I said, okay, then to me, that just sounds like both of you exercised your free speech. You refused to use their pronouns, and they called you a bigot for not using their pronouns. That sounds like that worked exactly like it was supposed to, that interaction. And then he said, and then he starts talking about, feeling censored because, when he was, his mama still calls him boy. And, calling someone's son is, the thing that people do in the South, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that he wasn't a terrible person. He wasn't like, what really had happened is just, he wasn't used to thinking about how respect and civility works for people who are not white men, who are not cis straight white men. And I assumed that he was just talking about regular people, just anybody, calling them boy, which would be kind of, condescending if you don't like it. And it seems fine to me to object. But he was talking about black men. And I told him that most black men would not be okay with that. And in fact, if there was a black man who would be cool with him calling him boy, I wouldn't think much of that black man. And that he and so that means that you don't get to have him as your friend. He doesn't want to have anything to do with you. You call him boy, you and he aren't going to be friends. That's not censorship. That's him deciding on boundaries for himself about what he will and will not accept in his life, what he will and will not tolerate as far as treatment. And so if you want to know this person, guess what? You don't get to call him boy. And guess what? That is not censorship. And I think people are just so used. There's certain people in our country who are just used to being able to say whatever they feel like saying. And it has been accepted as a standard for so long. But now that other people have the ability to say, not just the ability, but the access to the megaphones, like social media, that say, hey, stop doing this, it feels very much like they are being put upon to them sometimes. And, we talked it back and forth a couple of times, and he didn't admit I was right. He says, "Why?" He just goes, "Well, I'm just an old country boy." And I said, "Uh-huh, you're more subtle than you like to say." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Because you knew exactly what I meant, and you agreed with me." And he did. He got it. I do feel sometimes in these conversations, I mean, I'm not talking about Dave right now because Dave is amazing at, reaching people. But sometimes we have to remember too that it is a turn of mind that people just haven't made yet. Something that's super basic to us, something that's super obvious. Like, if I want you to feel respected by me and you tell me what your pronouns are and I refuse and I continue to misgender you, you're not going to feel respected by me. And that doesn't mean that you've done something to me. That means that I did something to you, and we have decided that you and I are not going to be in community with each other. It might mean that you call me a bigot, but guess what? You misgendered me, which is, to me, much worse than me calling you what you actually are in this moment, which is someone who has decided that the way you think things are the way things should be because you are the one who gets to decide that. And guess what the haps are now? You don't get to decide anymore. You no longer are the voice that matters when it comes to deciding what other people's standards of how they wish to be treated are. That is just not the way the world works any longer. So, for me, I have the patience and the bandwidth to sit with people and have these kinds of conversations, these kinds of ways. And I am not in any way saying that any other marginalized person owes that to anybody who shows up talking crazy to them. I'm just saying that it's possible if you have the bandwidth for it, if you have the desire to do it. Sometimes it is possible to reach people because they just aren't thinking clearly. They just haven't. It's like you're telling them to take a left turn down the road and they keep looking to the right and telling you there is no left. And you have to tell them, turn your head. And sometimes it's just a question of getting people to turn their head. But, other people are way more committed. And I'm not saying that you have to be sitting in the car with them. I think any marginalized person who doesn't want to deal with this stuff should not have to. I shouldn't have to. It just happens that I kind of enjoy helping people, being there for that moment when that person has that, oh yeah, I didn't quite look at it that way. So for me, it's worth it. But, please, by all means, do not feel obligated yourself. I just loved Dave's video and he said it so succinctly, but I wanted to add like a personal experience to what he said. So I'm really going to go to bed now. I promise. All right.